This video was brought to you in part by the supporters of the AMTV Patreon. Thank you. Hello, and welcome to the Ident Review Extra, the spin-off show that takes a look at one individual ident each episode and gives it the review it deserves. And this time around, we're embarking on a journey through the ITV Network and all the different regional stations that comprised it. And this time, we're going up to the northeast to take a look at Tyne Tees. Launching in 1959, Tyne Tees became the 10th station of the ITV network, primarily serving vast parts of the northeast of England. The name Tyne Tees represents the two primary rivers that are situated in the region. The other main river, the Wear, was also considered to be included in the name, but was abandoned for fear of making the station title too long. So, Tyne Tees it was, and would remain so for the next 40 years. In terms of their ident presentation, let's go through the decades and see what they broadcast to those viewers who were tuning in the northeast.
Tyne Tees Television, Channel 8.
This is Tyne Tees Television, broadcasting to the north of England from the Pontop Pike, Bilsdale and associated transmitters of the Independent Broadcasting Authority.
Hello, good morning. It's Monday the 15th of June. The time is 9:25.
Well, now over to Eric Robson for the gardening programme, Earth Movers.
Now our late movie, it's 20 Chicago and the gangsters reign. The Untouchables contains strong language and scenes of violence throughout.
Peter has to be in two places at once, but will he make it to the church on time? Find out tonight. 2 visits to Coronation Street at 7:30 and 8:30, only here on ITV1.
Quite the evolution we see here. In its first few years on the air, the station would use a white anchor, which gradually transformed into 3 white T's before the full name of the station and its allotted channel number of the day showed up on the screen. It's relatively simple, but considering the era in which it was designed, that simple concept comes across quite effective, as I'm sure it did to those viewers in the 1960s. With the advent of colour television becoming the norm, when Tyne Tees began its full colour service in 1970, changes had to be made. Now, I'm sure it's this sequence that is most familiar to some of you. 4 yellow lines congregate in the centre of the screen to form the new Tyne Tees logo. 2 T's stacked above the letters T and V, creating a boxy look that would go on to define the channel's look for decades. And as with most of the ITV network at that time, the extra moniker of the word colour became a standard with the ident sequence throughout the 1970s. The dark blue background is hardly a surprise to see, as this shade worked well even if viewers were still watching on a monochrome set. The yellow of the logo is a lovely contrasting colour to go with it, standing out brightly, and with the rather rigid look at the new logo, it suits it really well. As colour became the definitive standard across UK households by the dawn of the 80s, this extra line of text was dropped, and the Tyne Tees ident would be subject to another update. The logo remains the same, though the way in which it settles on the screen has changed. This time it shoots in from the bottom, before flashing an array of colours as the name Tyne Tees then displays itself. The music has also changed, moving to a more synthesizer-based sound, again something which was seen to be extremely common across many TV channels at the time. It's interesting that as many franchise holders were radically overhauling their station's appearance in the early 80s, how Tyne Tees effectively decided to remain the same, albeit with some structural changes in its sequences, keeping the familiar look that viewers had become accustomed to, whilst trying at the same time to make it look and sound more up to date. Tyne Tees was also quite late to incorporate their first computer-generated ident to viewers' screens, the new sequence arriving in 1988. We see 2 streams of water move along before morphing into the station's logo, which again has remained the same as it had when first introduced back in 1970. However, this time we seem to have the colours swapped around. The dark blue background has given way to a very pale yellow shade, whereas the Tyne Tees logo ditches its bright, vibrant yellow for a very pale shade of blue. Pale shades can work just fine in an ident sequence, but I personally find this one to be really lacking. Swapping the colours around I don't think did the logo or background any favours, and for those with weakened vision like myself, it makes the Tyne Tees text at the bottom a lot harder to read as that remains in white. This new computer-generated sequence didn't last long, however, as in the very next year, 1989, ITV would introduce a generic ident that its franchise holders could take up, something that Tyne Tees would do until 1991. The 1991 ident in question is far superior to both the 88 and 89 variants for Tyne Tees. To start with, you have an impressive series of visual images cycling around before the logo manifests itself. Once again, it's the 1970 logo that's been updated for the 90s, now with more of a 3D flair, caked in a metallic grey which is dabbed with some primary colours. The final image feels a little bland to me with its heavy use of grey tones, but hey, I'd take this over the pale yellow and blues any day. In 1992, this sequence was updated to really hammer in the 3D theme of the logo, which does look impressive and overall feels a lot sleeker and more sophisticated. This look lasted with some minor variations up until 1996, in which Tyne Tees went for a whole new brand. Channel 3 would now be the dominant focus of the region's ident, with text displaying the northeast, with the name Tyne Tees being relegated to smaller text at the bottom of the screen. The decision to completely abandon the 25-year-old Tyne Tees logo was certainly a bold one, and to be honest, I don't think it quite paid off. Channel 3 in its branding doesn't have the same ring or the same impact, and just feels exceptionally bland and generic. Channel 3 branding was phased out in 1998 to return to a version of the tried and true Tyne Tees logo, although now the letters are no longer joined up, remaining separated. This too would have variations across its run, including some for a 40th anniversary celebration. When ITV introduced its hearts motif for its franchise holders to adapt, Tyne Tees once again took the mantle, the familiar logo now being minimised in the final image. But almost as quickly as it took them on, they dropped them, with the new millennium seeing the station put more of a focus on its logo once again, now with a series of dots surrounding the letters. Whilst it is nice to see the Tyne Tees logo be more front and centre, it is a little disappointing that the colour scheme comes across as a bit bland. For me, the 70s sequence still reigns supreme. As the 2000s progressed, most of the ITV regions gradually folded into using the ITV1 branding, with their regional identities either being referred to as smaller titles, or in some cases never mentioned again in terms of being seen on an ident. And for Tyne Tees, by the middle of the noughties, this too would be the case for the northeast. After starting off quite simply at the tail end of the 50s, Tyne Tees shines as an example of a regional franchise defining its identity right out of the gate. The anchor-style sequence used throughout the monochrome era has its fans, but it's really the stacked letters first seen in the early days of colour that Tyne Tees is arguably most remembered for. For several decades, it would be variations of this formation to which viewers in the northeast and across the UK would be able to identify Tyne Tees, and even if some sequences along the way were less successful than others, I'd argue it's hard to deny the massive space Tyne Tees carved out for itself in the grander pattern of the ITV network. And so that brings us to the end of another episode of the Ident Review Extra. If you enjoyed this look back at Tyne Tees, then please leave a like, comment your thoughts below, and subscribe to the channel for lots more Ident related content. I've been Adam Martyn from AMTV. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you next time. Well, that does bring us to the end of another day here on AMTV. We do hope you enjoyed the programme, and a special thank you to our patrons for helping to support the show, and to everyone who's tuned in. Until the next broadcast, we wish you a good night.